Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We do appreciate it. We know you have other options, so we appreciate you spending the next 30 minutes or so here with us. As Ben mentioned, I'm Brian Adler. I'm Senior Director of Cloud Market Strategy at Flexera, which is basically a fancy way of saying I try to function as a sort of cloud subject matter expert for our clients and prospects, and internally as well, right? Flexera has been around for decades, and as most companies have been around for decades, it was on-prem, right? We've made our own transition to SaaS, and that has been a transition for us internally as well. So I try to do that. Prior to joining Flexera, I was at a company called RightScale. Everybody out there knows that. One of the original CMPs, and had one of the original cloud cost management tools called Optima, which is now part of the Flexera portfolio called CCO. Won't be a sales pitch, but just kind of giving you the background. But I did take a brief hiatus between RightScale and Flexera, where I was an IT analyst over at Gartner for about 2.5 years, talking to folks about cloud adoption, cloud journeys. Every conversation either was about or headed into the cloud cost management space, right? So I've been talking about FinOps before it was cool, right? Before it was a thing. And I'm super excited to have my good friend and colleague Jeremy here with me as well. So let me have Jeremy introduce himself.
Thanks, Brian. Jeremy Chaplin, I'm Cloud Lead here at Flexera. I'm glad, Brian, you have the clicker, because that would have been a bit of a struggle for us to move past the introductions. But yeah, my responsibilities at Flexera are really just aligning what we're doing in the FinOps space from a solution perspective to what we're hearing in the market, what we're hearing from the foundation themselves, what we're hearing from customers that are doing this on the ground. So just making sure that our products kind of meet the needs of the market and the audience here today.
Thank you, Jeremy. So real quick, I'll run through the agenda and kind of get into the meat of what we're going to talk about. So first and foremost, we're here to talk about, well, I should have gone back, right? We're here to talk about FinOps and ITAM, right? You know, the collaboration and why these two are better together. As much as I hate the cliche, it's a true thing. You know, what is ITAM and why does it matter to FinOps? Hopefully most of you are familiar with it, at least at a high level, but we'll kind of do a little bit of a dig in. Then we've got some what I call data from the trenches, from our state of reports, which I'll mention a little more about that when we get there. And then Jeremy will get into some of the cloud costs that go beyond IaaS and PaaS, right? It's not just about the stuff you're running, it's about the stuff you're running on the stuff you're running, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll get into the meat about the collaboration, how these two disciplines, FinOps and ITAM, can work together, should work together, are better working together, if you will. And then some next steps. If you're an ITAM practitioner, go across the hall and meet the FinOps folks. What can you do for them, and vice versa. We'll talk a little bit about that. So with that said, you know, what is ITAM? Why does it matter to FinOps? Is Ron Brill in the room by any chance? Ron here? No, okay. Ron Brill from Anglepoint. I want to give a shout out. We've borrowed a few slides from him, and I appreciate his assistance here very much. This is sort of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of a high-level overview, if you will, right? The sentence here, let me read through it, and we'll parse it out a little bit. But a business practice that involves managing and optimizing the purchase, deployment, maintenance, utilization, and disposal of IT assets. Sounds a lot like FinOps if you replace IT assets with cloud resources, right? So it's very, very similar in terms of that. Most organizations have an ITAM program, and it's the people, processes, and technology around that, around knowing and controlling your IT assets, i.e. visibility and allocation of those, right? So it's, again, very similar. There's ISO standards written about this. There's ITIL library documents that are, you know, 4 inches thick and things like that. It's been around for a long, long time. Many organizations also have a provider-specific sort of ITAM practice or sub-practice or whatever the word would be, where you deal with the big spenders, right? Your Oracles of the world, your IBMs, your Salesforce, those kinds of things. And the goal there is to optimize your costs with those vendors, because these software licenses can be very expensive, but also to mitigate your financial and, more importantly, your compliance risks, right? Make sure you're using those within the confines of the contract and the entitlement that you have for that individual software package. I love this slide again. Thank you to the Anglepoint folks. Kind of does a good visualization. Tons of acronyms here, so let me unpack them, right? ITFM, IT Financial Management, sort of the umbrella that covers it all, if you will. On the right side, we have ITSM, IT Service Management. And that's the Cherwells of the world and the ServiceNows. You know, I'm sitting in front of a portal and I want a new red stapler and I click the button and I get the red stapler through a workflow and all that kind of stuff, right? ITAM, IT Asset Management, on the other side, typically about two big things, right? Hardware Asset Management, or HAM, and then Software Asset Management, or SAM. And you'll see SAM broken down there for SLM, SLC, and you might also hear it called SLO, right? And that's Software License Management, Software License Consolidation, and or Software License Optimization. It's all the same thing, making sure we're using our software licenses in the most financially responsible way and also from a contractually responsible way, if you will. And then FinOps kind of covers it all, right? And it also, if you notice, and I talked to Jared about this, you know, the definition of FinOps is cloud financial management, but he pointed out it's evolving cloud financial management, right? So it's not necessarily going to be just cloud going forward. And I think we might see that with the Focus initiative as well, and we'll see how that all pans out. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy to talk about some examples for some buzzwords you may have heard and how they're going to affect you.
Thanks, Brian. Clearly, we love our three-letter acronyms, don't we, in the IT industry? So, we hear all the time, when we kind of talk about the convergence of these disciplines. Well, does it matter to me? Do I have a problem today, or is this something that's kind of, down the road that I need to maybe worry about in a few years' time? But looking at this slide, and I won't kind of read from this, you can see the technologies here across the major hyperscalers. And indeed, in the kind of containerized world as well, there are technologies, not just bring your own licensing and Azure hybrid use benefit that everybody is familiar with, but technologies from all of the vendors, including PaaS services. RDS and Oracle are a great example if we look at Amazon at the top here, where licensing matters. You can bring your own license, your existing commitment, and you can turn off the kind of pay-as-you-go licensing aspect in the cloud and leverage something that you've already paid for. And I'm pretty certain everybody in this room, as here for FinOps today, right, is familiar with these technologies and knows that within their organization that they are using some of these today. So it's just kind of articulating that the problem is here right now, and we certainly need to do something about it.
Oh, thanks, Jeremy. So data from the trenches, right? Let me talk a little bit about some of the things that we're seeing. If you've heard of Flexera for one reason and one reason only, it might be our State of the Cloud report, right? We just finished up in March the 12th annual edition of that, and without patting ourselves on the back too hard, it's become sort of the de facto industry standard for the pulse, taking the pulse of the cloud computing industry. RightScale was acquired by Flexera in 2018, so the RightScale State of the Cloud report, if you're familiar with that, is the Flexera State of the Cloud report. It's just changed names. It's the same basic thing. We also do a similar report called the State of ITAM report, where we ask, forward-looking questions and backward-looking questions, challenges, metrics, initiatives, all that kind of stuff around both State of the Cloud and also the State of the ITAM. And what we're going to dig in here is a little bit of the data that we've seen from those most recent reports, the 2023 versions of these guys. So we asked this, the State of the Cloud and State of ITAM are what I call static and dynamic reports. The static bit, we ask certain questions every year because we want to find trends, right? We want to see these trends and be able to figure out where things are headed. And then as new technologies emerge, we are dynamic and we ask questions around those. One of the static questions we ask is, what are the following initiatives you're planning to make progress on in the next year? And for the 7th year in a row, number one, optimizing existing use of cloud, i.e. saving money, i.e. FinOps, right? That's why we're here, right? So 7 years in a row, it's been number one. But the interesting thing is that in the context of what we're discussing here, 3 of the top 6 or 7 or whatever are all kind of related to this, right? Moving from on-prem software to SaaS. A lot of folks are moving from getting out of running my own HR system or CRM system or whatever it is and leveraging a software as a service version for that. And then also managing software licenses in the cloud, right? This is something that's starting to bubble up in the list. We've seen this grow from the low 20s 4 or 5 years ago to now 37%, and we're just going to expect to see these continue to grow. Another question we have, next question, but this is something you all know, but I put this in here because the number was staggering, right? 600 billion, right? Gartner predicts that, and this is from a recent report just a couple months ago, Gartner predicts that by the end of 2023, the cloud spend, how do they define it? Public cloud services, spending on public cloud services is forecast to be almost $600 billion, right? So there is a lot of money, as we all know, heading into this area. Again, that's why we're all here. And another reason we're all here is this next one. We ask folks every year, another one of the static questions, what's your gut tell you? How much are you wasting? Year over year over year, it's between 28 and 34%. So roughly 30% is what folks feel are wasting, right? And I know you're all good at math out there, right? But 30% of 600 billion, $180 billion we're wasting as a community that we could be doing better with, right? Again, why we're all here today, right? This is from the State of ITAM. Those previous ones were from State of the Cloud. This one's from State of ITAM. Oh, and I should mention, folks, too, that they're taking pictures. Please do. At the end of this presentation, we have a, QR code that has a link so you can go ahead and download the PDF of all this. So just so you know at the end. So apologize for that. Should have mentioned that a long time ago. Anyway.
No, go on, take pictures. Go on.
Yeah, exactly. But please, exactly. But anyway, this one here is from State of ITAM. So we said, what's the level of significant interaction? Now we leave that up to the reader, an exercise for the reader, what that means, right? But significant level of interaction between your SAM team, your software asset management team, and the following teams. And for the first year, FinOps made the list, right? So 25%. Now we expect expect that to grow, right? And this is another one of those static questions we're going to ask, and I'm willing to bet we're going to see that guy march up the list over the next few years as more and more organizations realize that we need to get these folks together. And this last one, a bit of an eye chart, I do apologize, but this is also from the State of the Cloud. We ask, what are your cloud cost management responsibilities by your IT team? And for all organizations, it means for all 750 people who respond or whatever. I've tried to highlight with these boxes here the ones that are interesting and relevant to our discussion here. You notice that optimizing SaaS usage and costs and governing software licenses and IaaS and PaaS are on the left. That the cloud team or CCOE, 42%, or infrastructure and ops teams, 50%, 49%. Those are the folks, no offense, and I'm one of those folks, shouldn't be doing that, right? I'm not good at that. I don't know about software licenses. The folks who are good at it are down there in the purple on the right, right? You've got SAM team at 7% and 10%. Those are the folks that know that. Those are the folks that that's their job to do. They should be in the blue, and the others should be in the purple, right? So we have some work to do. The point of this slide is to say, we're heading the right way, but we still have some work to do. We got to get these folks to come across the aisle, meet each other, and start working together. And I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy here to talk a little bit about how this goes beyond IaaS and PaaS.
Great stuff. Thanks, Brian. Just an observation on the 28%. If I was filling in that survey, I'd be grossly underestimating what I thought I was wasting if my boss was going to see, that kind of number, right?
It is anonymized data, so y'all, please, if anybody's out there responding to us, please, it's anonymized. Be honest with us.
I bet it's more than 28%. So what we're spending in cloud, obviously we focus, and in the FinOps framework, we talk about how we can save money, how we can right size on our infrastructure as a service, how we can better use PaaS services to drive out cost, and even in the kind of function and serverless space, using those technologies to just pay as what we're consuming. But the next couple of slides just talk about different technologies, and they're not intended to be functionally equivalent, right? We're going from left to right here, from a server on-premise to something on a PaaS infrastructure. They're functionally different, right? Quite clearly here, as I move from an on-premise 10-core server, where I've got 5 licenses needed for my SQL Server, and I move into putting something in the cloud, I might provision this workload and think, actually, I need active failover here. One of the outcomes, right, that we look for when we're using cloud technology is, redundancy, customer outcomes, improved performance, scalability, and all of that great stuff. So it's easy that we can go in and tick these boxes. That's exactly what we want cloud for. But as a cloud engineer, or even possibly as a solution architect, right, am I aware of the licensing implications of doing that? And then as we move further to the right, and maybe we deploy that as something on Kubernetes, right, business critical tiers, or maybe using RDS, then the implications from a licensing perspective just continue to increase. And it might be that you're aware. That's absolutely fine, right? It might be that you want those outcomes and you're totally aware of the license implications, but I can bet there are many times that that is not the case. And so this is really about being informed and understanding, right? We rarely talk about risk. We rarely talk about compliance in the FinOps space, but there will be software audits in cloud, right, this year for sure, if they're not already happening, and therefore we need to start considering this. The other slide is same example, but just for Oracle technologies, right? Again, it's different functionally from left to right here, but if I'm just ticking these boxes and taking advantage of, the scalability and redundancy that the vendors provide me with, then it's going to cost me. I am, effectively deploying the same amount of infrastructure twice. The license implications exist. Now, this one actually is probably my favorite example because everybody will have seen this. This is Microsoft's pricing calculator. Pretty simple example, an 8-core CPU running SQL Server. And the IaaS costs $324 a month for that box. That's not bad, right? I'd be perfectly happy with that myself. Seems quite reasonable for hardware. That's on a pay-as-you-go basis. But the operating system is nearly as much. Right? My Windows license is another $268. And then I want to run SQL Server, probably standard edition here. But that's $2,200 nearly, right? It's many multiples of the actual infrastructure costs. But we're not really thinking about that when we're pulling those levers, right? Changing it from pay-as-you-go to reservations will drive down that IaaS cost further, but it will have no impact on my Windows Server and my SQL licensing. So it really is material that we start to consider these things. And of course, you're not all going to be running Windows Windows Server and SQL Server. This won't be the case in some of the open source spaces, but many organizations are using these technologies. Brian, over
Yeah,
to you.
that moves with me. And I should mention too that I don't know if there's any Microsoft folks in the room. I know there's some Oracle folks in the room. Not ding on Oracle or Microsoft, right? Those are rack rates. This is standard stuff, right? So we're not picking on in any way, shape, or form. It's just you got to be careful about how you do these things. Where and how you deploy this stuff definitely does matter. So a bit about the collaboration. How can we get these folks together and showing that they're kind of doing the same things and maybe just using different words for kind of the same stuff they've been doing. FinOps and ITAM share this sort of similar three-phase approach. We're familiar with the FinOps framework here, the inform, optimize, and operate. There's an ISO standard about trustworthy data in ITAM, which is about getting your arms around what you've got, the visibility, so it kind of maps nicely to inform. There's an optimize in ITAM, a different section of that same ISO document that talks about how to optimize in the ITAM world. And then there's one about lifecycle integration as well, which maps again to this operate phase. So it's kind of the same things the ITAM folks have been doing that the FinOps, or I should say the FinOps folks are now doing the same things the ITAM folks have been doing for decades at this point. We're just kind of calling it something different, right? So it shouldn't be that hard to kind of, bring these folks together. The FinOps and ITAM oftentimes share the same similar principles, right? I won't read through all these, but teams need to collaborate, obviously, right? Everyone takes ownership for their usage, be it cloud usage, be it their IT asset usage. A centralized team drives FinOps, right? A centralized team typically drives ITAM as well. They have that knowledge and best practices and espouse that to the rest of their organization, et cetera. Reports should be timely, et cetera. Business decisions should be the driver, all that kind of stuff. So again, very similar principles between the two disciplines.
Brian, we have actually got Ron in the room as well.
There he is. So there's Ron, who I said thank you. I would already give you a shout out about the providing us those slides. I'm going to use my lame joke now that you're in the room, okay? So Ron Brill has forgotten more about ITAM than I've ever known. So if you have any questions, please hit up Ron and the Angle Point folks. And again, thank you, another Angle Point slide. Very timely, yeah, exactly. And then they share similar domains as well, right? So on the left, you're familiar with that, right? Understanding cloud usage and cost, understanding IC asset usage and cost, performance tracking and benchmarking, real-time decision making, cloud rate optimization, IT asset cost optimization, organizational alignment. Again, all the very, very similar things these folks have been doing, right? So it shouldn't be that hard to bring everybody to the same table. But, and here's the but, right? There's always the goodness, and then the but. The green check mark is things that are typically a focus of that particular discipline. The X is typically not, the red X typically not, and the yellow X is one where should be, but maybe isn't, right? And if you notice, not surprising, ITAM focuses on on-prem hardware and the licensing and all that kind of stuff. FinOps focuses on the cloud things. Well, if you look at those two and you munge the two columns together, hey, we have a green check mark everywhere, right? So they're, again, I keep saying better together, but it really is a better together kind of thing, right? And with that, I think I'll pass it back to Jeremy for a little bit to go through how we can talk more about this overlap and the collaboration.
Great stuff. So we are all, I think, intimately familiar with the FinOps framework and the life cycle here around inform and optimize and operate. And we're just going to kind of touch on this a little bit and just talk about, again, the similarities between those ITAM and FinOps disciplines that we're undertaking. Inform gives us that visibility, right? We're ingesting that cost, we're allocating it for the purposes of show back, charge back, shame back, getting allocation right for budgeting and forecasting and benchmarking, unit economics and other things, really, really important. But if I think of that and I think about that inform stage with my ITAM hat on, then there's more to it, right? What are our licensing and entitlements and how can we use those in the cloud? Do we need to think about obsolescence and vulnerability on infrastructure that we have and end of service life for things that we're running? And also, I've now got to start to think about, well, am I using things like bare metal, infrastructure from the cloud vendors where I'm entirely responsible, right? It's a shared responsibility model, but bare metal is my problem. The costs and licensing for everything sits on the customer there. It's really a server in someone's other data center at that point. And then, as we said previously, the virtual machine, the PaaS services also have an implication from a licensing perspective. And do I have visibility of that? Often on-premise, it's pretty easy to do. You might do a monthly or even a quarterly audit or have technology deployed that gathers, your license entitlements, and you can report from a risk and compliance perspective. But how do I do that in cloud when it's really kind of ephemeral, short-lived, there's millions of resources? It's a much harder challenge. not sure why we ended up going the other way around the circle here, but nonetheless, right, the operate phase here.
That's my bad, sorry.
No worries. We're looking at defining, executing processes. It's about the business processes to execute on our optimization recommendations. It's about measuring success, unit economics, KPIs, and other things. And of course, doing this at scale, as we are in the cloud, means that we have to do something automatically, to do this successfully. And again, I touched on the unit economics piece, right? We can obviously start to bring this data together using the informed stages in the allocations that we've done and maybe paint a picture. I had a great example in the session that we had last night about a typical unit economics measure that might mean something to everybody, and that was miles per gallon, which I thought was a fantastic example. ITAM hat again, right? What am I going to do in this operate stage? Well, I need to find ways to start to monitor that, not in monthly or quarterly terms, but in kind of near real time. I need to stay close to the licensing technologies and changes, right, that the industry will be making. If I was a software company, we are a software company, but we'll be looking for ways to maximize revenue as customers start to use our licenses in cloud. Right? IBM Cloud Paks and other things are great examples of that, where they're running on containerized workloads. And we also want to automate this. Am I bring my own licensing to all of my infrastructure, or am I in a migration program where when I'm stopping using a license on-prem, I can then use it in cloud, right? Looking at ways that we can automate that. And ultimately, and I touched on this in the session on the main stage earlier, if we're doing things like unit economics, if we're doing budgeting and forecasting, and we have the total cost, including my licensing aspects that I might be including on-premise, then I've got more accuracy in the numbers that I'm producing and the unit cost that we may be measuring there, because we're more informed about the total cost of ownership. And then in the optimized stage, right, there's some levers we can pull, of course, if we're thinking with our FinOps hats on, right sizing, switching things off, getting rid of unused infrastructure and unused resources. They're all great things that we're all pretty familiar with here. We can use EDP discounts, negotiated discounts. We can use RI's savings plan, spot technology. It's all great, drives down the cost, but it drives down the cost of the infrastructure, not of the licensing that I'm paying in those particular cases. Obviously, again, ITAM hat on, right? Bring your own licensing is the well-known example in the Microsoft space. Dead easy to tick a box and do that. But of course, the other vendors do allow you to do that. Build your own images and ultimately be responsible for the licensing. We need to think about that in the terms of cloud resources now. That can be quite hard for ITAM practitioners, where it's a server in a data center, it was always licensable. Well, what happens now in the kind of stopped state or terminated states? What is license compliance when I think about the ephemeral nature of cloud? And as I said earlier, let's bring the kind of risk and compliance piece in there as well. So complete alignment between the two disciplines. You can see there the commonality between the two there at every stage in the life cycle. So in terms of next steps, there's a lot of text on the slide here, and Brian referenced the QR code. So feel free to take pictures, of course, but you can go and digest this at your leisure if you want to kind of download the deck. I'm no licensing expert, and I spent quite a bit of time doing some research, and this is SQL and Windows examples on these two slides, about how I would actually work out what my on-prem licensing model was, what I was entitled to do, and then looking at the different consumption in cloud and DTU based for SQL licensing and serverless compute. Those things aren't eligible. And then I've got to work out, with my ITAM guys, what I can actually use, collaborating with those teams, and then working out how to apply them in the cloud. And it's not just a one-to-one, right? There's a factor for the different operating systems and database technologies between the number of cores that I'm entitled to use on-prem and what I can then use in the cloud. And the point really is just these two slides is it's complex. I produced this, I don't know what, a couple of weeks ago. It's also going to change. Okay, so we have to stay abreast of.
It's probably out of date already, right?
Well, it's probably, yeah. I'm hoping not, maybe not that rapidly, but you get the point, right? This is quite volatile, changing position, and it's complex. Now, when we're doing that at scale, that's going to be really hard, isn't it? Right? If I'm trying to do the maths and infrastructure's continually being provisioned, and I might maybe in a migration program to cloud, how am I going to stay on top of this? How am I going to be able to measure what I still have left as entitlements, what my consumption is in the cloud space? So we really need to think about in that technology and automation space how we can bring things to bear. All right.
Thank you, Jeremy, and I'll kind of bring us home. Oh, good, I got 5 minutes before the trap door goes or whatever Ben was saying is going to happen to us here. So roadmap for success, kind of some thoughts that we put together from an initial education and assessment perspective, and then also how to roll this out and implement it kind of going forward. So first thing, education, right? Cloud training and certification for the major cloud providers, right? The AWS has certifications, Azure does, Google does, OCI does, all this kinds of stuff, right? Make sure your folks know how, obviously, to use the tool, the cloud they're going to be using. And then FinOps training and certification. You heard Stacy talk a lot about that today, earlier on, right? You folks, if you can, get a FinOps certified practitioner. That's a very good thing. If you have a lot of time on your hands, get the FinOps Pro. It took a while. But it's very, very helpful, right? Absolutely. And you can kind of, that's the first step, right? Learning is always the first step. Then do the assessment, right? Assess your ITAM cloud capabilities, assess your FinOps capabilities from a people, process, and technology perspective. And then benchmark, where am I at right now, right? So I can figure out later, am I taller or shorter than I was before, right? I want to make sure that, I can start to track my progress. And then as with any discipline, right, there's no big surprise here, but understand your goals and your objectives and talk to the stakeholders and make sure you're all in alignment, right? Make sure that what you're trying to measure is what they want you to measure, and that's going to be useful to them. And then develop. You want some governance structure around this. You want some sort of governance in place so people don't go off in the weeds, if you will. And then again, those goals and the KPIs approved by those stakeholders to make sure, again, that you're measuring against things that are meaningful to your organization. Short, medium, long-term roadmap for these different disciplines, if you will. That's kind of aligns with the crawl, walk, run kind of thing, right? Don't try to boil the ocean. Get yourself slowly to that end state. Tool selection as required. You probably have a FinOps tool. You probably have an ITAM tool. Maybe they can work together. Maybe they can't. And you might have to add what was, I forget who was mentioning it, the 3.7 up to 4.1 tools that folks are using to do this, right? You bring ITAM in the mix, it's probably another, at least one, if not 2 or 3 that are helping there as well. And then low-hanging fruit priorities identified. Find the easy stuff and go ahead and pick those off first. So that's sort of that initial education and assessment. And then when it comes to time to roll it out and kind of keep it going from an implementation perspective, we'll talk about the inform, optimize, and operate, and they'll be in the right order this time. So, sorry about that. So education and collaboration, right? Again, make sure everybody's on the same page and everybody's talking the same language, if you will. Develop a tagging strategy and implement that tagging using automation. I'll go back a little bit to my Gartner days when I used to talk to folks and they'd say the elevator pitch. Hey Brian, I'm new to cloud. What are the 3 things I should get right? I used to say first and foremost, get your account structure right. Leverage, I'm more of an AWS guy, I apologize to the other clouds here, but get your organization, your sub-organizations, get all your OUs in order, have your accounts at the bottom. You can do a lot of cost allocation just based on your account structure. So get your account structure right. Number 2, get your tagging structure right. Everything that you can't allocate based on your accounts, go ahead and put a tag. Don't put a tag just to have a tag. A tag has hygiene. A tag has some effort applied to go ahead and keep it updated, right? So make sure you're using the ones that are meaningful, but don't use ones that don't. And then the last bit was governance, and I won't get into that, but basically make sure people don't go off in the weeds. Put guardrails in place so folks are going to make mistakes. Prevent them from making those mistakes. They're not going to be malicious. They're going to do something wrong and help them not do those wrong things. And then develop dashboards, and different dashboards. Different folks care about different things. Your CIO is going to care about something very different than the developer who's going and looking at how much did that test and dev environment cost me and do I care, right? So develop dashboards that are appropriate for the stakeholders. And then budget and forecast dashboards as well, right? I really want to know that day 5 that I'm on track to go over my budget at the end of the month. I don't want to find out on day 29, right? So go ahead and let me know that as early as you can. Optimize. They talk about this in the State of FinOps report, right? I think they call it empowering engineers to take action, I think is how they phrase it or something like that. Again, enable those folks. Don't just say, hey, you're wasting money. Say, hey, here's how you can help us save money, right? Empower them so they can help you. Work with engineering to identify and address initial low-hanging fruit. Hey, I noticed this EBS volume has been dangling here unattached for 6 months. Can I get rid of it? Those kinds of things. Identify and address low-hanging fruit in the software licensing world. Hey, can we tick the Azure hybrid use benefit on all these? Why not? Those kinds of things. Those are kinds of things that are fairly easy to do. And then lastly, on the operate side, establish processes and automation around this. Refine and define these KPIs and make sure that you're doing the right thing. And it's the reason the framework is a circle, right, is it never ends, right? You're always doing it, right? You're going to get better at it, but you're always doing it. And that kind of lines up with that continuous improvement. And Jeremy, do you have anything about
Just
15
an
seconds before we jump to the next
just
one?
an observation. Obviously, tagging is super critical here, but I just racking my brains. I don't think I've ever seen an IT asset management tag on a resource, right, that's kind of indicating the license state or anything like that. So it was just an observation from my point of view. Maybe
Absolutely, and that's where we need to get to, right? Absolutely. And then as promised, here's the QR code, so I didn't want to leave that out. Jeremy and I and a bunch of us, others will be out at booth G14. It's pretty much centrally located out there. We got a good spot. Thank you, FinOps Foundation. Feel free to hit us up here after this or over there or whenever, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian and Jeremy.
What's that?
That was awesome.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Very cool.
I don't know if we have time for questions. Be glad to take them. I don't know what the
We've
scoop
got like
is.
20 seconds.
I hit 0, so I was like worried I was going to end.
Let me put it this way. This is the last session before food. If anybody has any questions.
If you want to stay, we'll stay. How's that? There you go.
Does anybody have any questions? Any questions at all?
Okay.
Fair enough. You can either ask them now or
I'm not going to keep you from the
You mentioned something about tagging automation. How do you do that?
Tagging automation.
Automation, yeah.
Yeah, tagging is challenging. Think about what you're using for provisioning infrastructure.
Versus doing it by hand.
Yeah, so I think it needs baking into the process that's provisioning in the infrastructure in the first place. So if you're using CID to CD scripting and things, connecting that to other sources of metadata, or CMDB, an enterprise architecture tool, so that as the infrastructure is provisioned or accounts are provisioned, that you have the tagging in place already and that you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what we've seen, for example, I've used in the past is that, there's our own little portal to go ahead and I'm going to launch this 3-tier lamp stack, right? And it knows that Brian logged in and it knows that Brian is part of this group and it knows that Brian is working on this application. It makes the call to the AWS API to go ahead and launch this, M1's, well, I'm dating myself, M5 extra large, right? Not M1s anymore. And as a result, it knows all those things. So it says put all these 6, 7 tags on it when it gets provisioned, right? Yeah. You don't want to do it after the fact. Fat finger, people will miss it. It gets sloppy. It gets ugly. Yeah.
Great question. All right, cool. Any other questions? Last chance.
Thanks all. Have a
Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much for
Thanks for watching that session. I'm sitting here in San Diego right after FinOps X. We hope you join us next year here live 2024. In the meantime, please subscribe to the channel and join the community. Get involved. Join the summits. Get in a working group. And don't forget to get FinOps certified. Because next year here in San Diego for FinOps X, it's going to be twice as big. Come join the party. Come meet your people. Welcome home.